You can raise your hand if you want to answer. Okay, Shion.
I presume maybe because we are not interested in generalizing, and I think usually here expert opinion is inquired into. I don't.
Okay. But in the spirit of let's plan for the rainy day, we may not be interested in generalizing at that moment, but in general, right, when we're doing research in general, are we more inclined, if all things were equal and we were to have our way, would we be interested in generalizing or would we not be interested in generalizing? Which of those two hold?
We'll be interested in generalizing.
Exactly. So nobody wakes up and says, you know what, I'm just going to do this study and I have no interest in generalizing. I just want to spend all this money and just have it in this small context, right? So the premise is that we all want to generalize our results. So if that is the premise, then why would we not go for a problem? What circumstances might, well, to use the word force us, or not maybe force is too harsh a word, might, compel us to use non-probability based techniques then?
Not a common outcome or something.
Okay, excellent. So when we're dealing with a very rare outcome, right? And it's very, 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 very hard to get a random sample, right? I've done studies for, that involved, rare genetic disorders. Those are extremely hard to recruit patients. So obviously the probability of us, recruiting a random sample is almost zero. So we'll have to use a non-probability sampling. All right, what other reasons might compel us to use a non-probability sampling technique?
Konga, your hand was up. You wanted to say something.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to highlight that in some of the cases, we may try to use non-probability sampling because our population may not be homogeneous. So it will be difficult for us to apply probabilistic sampling because there are some aspects of the population which might not be represented. Hence, it will be necessary for us to subdivide the population into quotas or even into some subsample or stratas so that we will be able to make sure that there is a representative sample in whatever we'll be doing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, man. But while I have you on the line, it seems you are a bit contradictory in your responses. So let's pick that answer of yours apart, if you don't mind. So on the one hand, you say you want the population is it's heterogeneous, right? And then you said that we would like to use non-probability sampling so that the results will be representative. When we use non-probability sampling, are we going out to get representative answers? What do you think?
Yeah, so sometimes after dividing the population into subgroups, then we can now use probabilistic sampling into those quotas or subgroups, which we can call stratas. Because sometimes for us to just use to use probabilistic sampling for all the population in general, there are some groups which may not be represented. Hence, the need for us to start by subdividing the population into subgroups, then we can select from the subgroups there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, one last final question, right? When the population is as heterogeneous as you have painted it, is that a compelling reason to use sorry if I'm putting you on the spot here, but I just want to make a point, right? So when the population is heterogeneous, are we forced to use non-probability sampling, or is there another approach we could use that will still be probabilistic?
Okay, so sometimes before conducting a research, you may start by doing a rapid assessment for you to get an overview of the population. Hence, after doing the quick rapid assessment, you may see that there are some characteristics within the population which may need for you to target a specific group And hence, in the end, instead of just targeting everyone, you end up targeting the specific individuals or specific groups within the population. Hence, the use of non-probabilistic sampling.
Okay, great. All right, great. So let's take that example of yours and let's build on it. So you have this population, and you have, let's say, let's for the sake of argument, let's just say the US population, right? And then you have, or let's use the Nigerian population. I think most of the audience maybe based in Nigeria. So you have, let's say, you want to sample by, let's say, ethnicity, right? And you want to make sure that, of course, there's so many ethnic groups in Nigeria, like, quite hundreds really. But you want to make sure that certain racial groups or ethnic groups are represented. For instance, you want to make sure that people in, and let me leave ethnicity, right? Let's just talk about geographic region. You want to make sure that people in the northern region are represented, people in the southern region. What approach could we use that will still be probabilistic, but will still guarantee us of getting fair number of individuals, sufficient number of individuals from each of those regions? Because that's the point that Fungi is really concerned about, that our population is quite heterogeneous, and just randomly taking a simple random sample might not give us that flavor we want. We might end up with just a handful of people from one part, or maybe even none, right? So his argument is that let us have a guarantee that those individuals will be captured in the population. Now, my counter argument is that, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that we should now resort to a non-probabilistic sampling. We could use other approaches that are still probabilistic in nature. So my question to you, maybe you or somebody else, is what other approaches could we use that would still address that issue you have, which is a very valid concern, but also give us that flair of representativeness? Any thoughts?
Classified random sampling.
Exactly. And why I still have you on the line, what does that mean? That is absolutely
So
correct.
that means we take from every population, and from each of those populations, we now create a sampling based on the ratio of the population. There we can set a formula for choosing number of people based on their proportion of occurrence.
Okay.
Or, yeah.
All right. So step number one, we do what?
We stratify.
Excellent. Step number one, we stratify. So in this case, if we had six regional groups, we'll divide the population into those 6 groups. True or false? One person can belong into 2 strata.
Yes.
Actually, the answer is actually false.
Sorry, cluster.
Okay, let me ask again, right? True or false? An individual can belong in 2 strata when you stratify.
No.
False. So false. You can only be one stratum, right?
Yeah.
All right. True or false? When we stratify, let's say we divide the population into 6 strata, we can choose which strata we want to include in our study after stratifying. So we divided our population into 6 strata. So true or false? We can then choose which of those 6 we want to include. True or false?
False.
It's a mirroring true, a mirroring false. Which is it?
False.
All right. The person who says
we have to have all of them, pick from all of them. But I think for strata, we can choose which of them.
Okay. You are contradicting yourself, Sean. All right.
What are
But you're Francis, can you mute yourself, please? So who wants to give? I had some true, I had some falses. Who wants to, from either camp, want to defend the answer?
Sheon, you were speaking. Will you go first? Okay.
Okay, my thoughts are, if you have strata, 6 strata, you have to pick from each of them to make sure it's representative. But I know you spoke something about cluster. So I know is that a cluster of strata is homogeneous. And so if you are using a homogeneous group, you have for each of those strata, you have to pick from each of them. But if like a department of an office has branches everywhere, you don't have to pick all those branches. You can, because they contain multiple characteristics. So you can just pick a sample of them. So that's where I'm going to.
All right, thanks. You might be confusing clusters with strata. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So if we like think of this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as complete strata, see they have different colors. So once we stratify, we must sample from each stratum. We can't stratify and then say, you know what, we don't like this, because imagine when you have, if you stratify, let's say we stratified into these 5 groups and we chose to completely ignore this group, what bias have we introduced?
Selection bias.
Yeah, but what specific kind of selection bias? The hint, it starts with the word none. Any thoughts?
Someone said non-probability.
No.
Another one said non-response selection bias.
Non-representative.
Okay. All right. Our sampling frame is supposed to cover everybody. So when it doesn't cover everybody, we call it what? I've given you a very clear hint.
Non-representative.
Oh, no, you are not listening to my hint. The sampling frame is supposed to cover everybody. When it doesn't cover everybody, we call it what?
Non-probability selection bias.
Non-inclusive.
I said it right in my answer. I said it right in my hint. Okay. Let me repeat myself one more time, okay? Our sampling frame is supposed to cover everybody. So when it doesn't
randomize
everybody, we call it what? What was the word I was so emphasizing in my statement now?
Non-coverage.
Exactly, non-coverage bias. So non-coverage bias is when the sampling frame doesn't cover the whole population. Like in this case, you stratified the whole and you decided to ignore that whole stratum. That is obviously a case of non-coverage bias. Now, how does non-coverage bias differ from, somebody earlier said non-response bias? What's the difference between those two?
non-response bias could be due to attenuation.
Oh, your network is really breaking bad.
Well, the difference between the two is that non-coverage is when everybody that are meant to be sampled are not sampled, while non-response bias is when people that are meant to reply to maybe a questionnaire or something didn't reply to them.
Exactly. Now let's just look at the word from the English, just the basic English meaning. Respond. When I say, oh, he did not respond, what does that imply? Somebody listening to that conversation, what would they conclude reasonably? The statement is, oh, he or she did not respond. Any reasonable listener, what would they conclude? That what happened first?
Nobody.
I
But
will
that you
block
contacted the
that.
person.
So
Yeah,
that there was
contact.
someone. Okay.
No
The
communication.
question didn't answer the question asked.
The question asked. So that means that the question was asked first, right? That's the only logical conclusion. When you say, oh, he or she did not respond.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sure you were saying something important, but your network is failing you. But I think the general point of what we're trying to say is that when you say something, somebody did not respond, oh, I called him, or I tried to contact and did not respond, right? That assumes obviously that you tried to contact the person. It would be very bizarre if you said the person did not respond, and when we asked you, so when did you call them? And you said, I never did. Like, so why did you say they did not respond, right? So non-response bias means that we try to reach this person and they did not respond, right? Non-coverage is a different thing entirely. We did not even reach this person at all. They were out of our sampling frame, right? And so our sampling frame does not cover them. That's why we call it non-coverage bias, right? But non-response is, that the individuals did not respond. Now, that someone did not respond, does that automatically give rise to non-response bias? What do you think? What's the major problem? Because of course, in every study you do, some people will not respond. So that is not necessarily the issue here, right? What is the issue we are worried about when we talk about non-response bias?
I think if you assuming that, most people are not going to respond.
Is it an issue of most people? So your focus is now on the quantitative aspects, right? You're saying so based on what you're saying, right? And please, why I still have you on the line, you're saying that if few people responded, that
it reduces our sampling size. It affects our sampling size.
Okay, but sample size has to do with what? Is it with precision or is it with bias?
Precision.
But we're now talking about what?
Okay, bias, okay.
Bias. Remember, precision results, remember we talk about the difference between error and bias, remember? I said that error is just a simple, honest mistake, right? Bias is an intentional mistake. We're worried about error because it affects precision. We are worried about bias because it affects blank. What's blank?
Validity.
Excellent. So bias affects validity, and that's what we're worried about it. Now let's come back to non-response bias we're talking about. Somebody gave an argument that they quantified issues of response bias by volume. So according to that argument, if you have few people who did not respond, then you don't have non-response bias. But if you have a lot of people who do not respond, then you have non-response bias on your hands. Is that who agrees or who disagrees with that argument?
Ali, your hand is up.
I think
Yes, good morning, sir.
Yes.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Please, I have a little question based on this non-probability sampling. I have a list.
Okay. Let's keep your question.
A beneficiary. So it is a beneficiary. So in the research, we didn't have the list of beneficiary, which we need to go and conduct or collect the data from them. So, and at this stage, we are using a purposive sampling. So, but we do not have the list of beneficiaries of these farmers, which we are going to collect the data from them. So are we still going to use a purposive sampling or snowball sampling? Because since we are talking about the non-probability sampling here.
All right, we'll come to that. We'll answer your question in a minute. So
thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome. So we will not forget it. We'll answer it when we talk about purposive. Now let's go back to that original argument, which I can't remember who made that argument. The argument was about the crux of the argument was that non-response bias has to do with the percentage who respond or who do not respond. So my question was, who disagrees with that? And of course, if you disagree, you have to tell us why you disagree.
Sheung.
I think the opportunity to provide a response, all the resource and opportunities there to provide a response. And if the person refuses to respond, that is where we say is they didn't respond.
Okay. So if you what samples, what response rate cutoff do you conclude that is you have bias? Let's frame it this way now. At what percentage response rate do you conclude that there's bias, there's non-response bias? And the hint here is that this is a trick question, by the way. So who wants to answer this trick question for us? No one. This is because I declared I declared transparency.
Okay. Emmanuel.
Yeah.
Prof.
Yeah.
I don't really think, it has to do with percentage because, bias has nothing to do with sample size, so to say. So, whether one or two non-response bias would effectively affect the internal validity of the study. So we cannot really measure how many of these non-response bias that we have in the study.
Okay, that's a very good answer. So I hope we all heard him. There is no percentage cutoff at which we can say below 20%, there is non-response bias. Now, unfortunately, most of the scientific journal editors didn't get this memo. So some journals will actually tell you that surveys below this response rate were not inclined to accept them for publication. It's like, well, you shouldn't actually say that because that has you are worried about precision, right? And even at that, a small response rate doesn't tell you anything about the precision per se, because you could have a low response rate, like let's say 20%, but the base number is like 1 million people. So the percentage is actually not a very useful metric, right? So now, if we went ahead with Emmanuel's argument, which is correct, by the way, that we cannot use the percentage response rate to determine non-response bias, the question then remains, how then do we determine that there's non-response bias in the survey? And this is not a trick question. This is just a basic, simple, honest question.
Anyone?
Prof, I could say it's lost to follow up.
Yeah, but you have let's say you've been hired as a chief, a company wants to do a national survey, right? They've already collected the data. And this is not unusual, by the way, if you experience this a lot in your career if you go into the business of research. And like, we collected this data from 6,000 people. We're not sure what issues are with it. We suspect there may be non-response bias. We don't know what that means, and we want to show that it exists or doesn't exist. How will you handle that, right? What will you do in that case? And this is as real world scenario as it gets. How will you determine that there is, external bias in that data set? This was again, this is supposed to be a national representative of the country. How will you?
Sample size.
Sorry? Sean, you said something? Okay, maybe not. Any help for us? Any takers?
Response in the chat. Waiting the responses.
Well, waiting the response, it means that you are trying to correct the problem. But you have to first of all identify the problem first. So we can't solve a problem when we don't even know what the problem is. So how would we know?
Mm-hmm. No response yet. Okay. Abraham.
Yeah, I want to give it a try. You look at the questions that have been said. You know, some questions are there when they are set, they are leading questions, and such leading questions will actually bring forth leading answers. So some questions are leading questions, and through that, you get to know that at least the responses, they are biased in a way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so to address Abraham's point, there are 3 types of bias in epidemiology. Who wants to remind us what they are?
Selection, measurement, and confounding biases.
Excellent. So what Abraham describes is what kind of bias?
Measurement bias.
Measurement, right? The non-response bias is what kind of bias?
Selection bias.
Selection bias, excellent. So Abraham, nice try. And the point he raised is very important, but that's describing a different issue altogether, which is also important. But in this case of non-response bias, how would we, and this is the real world scenario, as real as it gets, how would you, as the chief epidemiologist or the researcher in that context, determine that there is non-response bias in this data set? Somebody said weighting, right? You weight the data. That's a very good clue, right? But if I were to go in that direction, then since we don't seem to have answers from this, since I'm very unfortunate in this line of questioning, maybe I'll take another line. How do you determine which variables to weight your data on? I'm going to use that last answer as a cue to maybe to build on that. Perhaps I'll be more lucky in that path. How, if you decided, okay, I want to weight the data, right? How do you determine what variables to weight the data on? All right, okay, let me take, okay, go ahead, please answer your question, answer the question.
I think the survey we were able to get back.
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
The survey we were able to get back from
Yes.
the participants, yeah.
Okay, all right, let's take this from first principles. If the survey we took of the population was truly representative, right? Let's say the general population has 50% of males. You know, if we calculate the percentage of men in the population, it is 50%. What would we expect in this sample if the survey is representative? What would we expect?
We expect survey from the same number of participants.
Is it the same number that we're looking at?
From half the sample size to be male.
Yeah, we expect 50%, right? If 20% of the population was white, what would we expect in the sample?
10%.
Really?
At least half.
20% of sample size to be white.
Emmanuel, we're saying that the population, the target population from which the sample came from, 20% of them are white. What percentage do you expect in the sample if the sample were representative?
Say 20%.
Same 20%, right? All right, so that's now. So based on this hints we've provided, how will you now determine as a chief researcher that Chinedu, can you kindly mute yourself, please? How will you determine that your sample is representative? How will you determine that there's no response bias?
So if we don't get response from the survey, the response rates
not representative of the actual population strata.
Okay, so we'll take all the key demographic variables like age, sex, race, and everything that's available in the data set that is a key demographic variable. We'll tabulate them. I will compare them against what?
The population.
And where will we get that data from the population from?
Your sample size calculation.
The sample size.
No.
The
the entire population as the general population, for example, the population of the country.
From the entire population.
Yeah, but where will you get that data from? So we said you're going to take data like variables like age, sex, race, economic status. We're going to tabulate them in our data set, and we're going to compare them to the population. But where are you going to get the population data from?
Could be from census.
National Demographic Survey.
Excellent. We'll look at large national surveys that exist. We can look at the census. So if the census is telling us that 60% of the population is female, and our sample is showing up 20% is female, then we have a problem of non-response bias by gender, right? And that's how we're going to do for each of those variables. And it is those variables that do not align with the population that we can then say, okay, we have to correct this problem. Now we have identified the problem. So that goes back to the solution that somebody else recommended earlier, that will weight the data. Well, we first of all have to identify the problem. The problem in this case is those key demographic variables that do not align with the population. When it is only after we have identified those variables that we can now say, oh, okay, now we're going to weight the data on this and that variable. So that's how you think about it. All right. So we've established that obviously we want to do representative samples when we can, but sometimes we're constrained because maybe we don't have resources, maybe the disease is rare. Maybe we're just doing a pilot study. If you're doing a pilot study, you don't need to worry about, or a feasibility study, you don't have to worry about the results being representative, because the primary goal of doing a feasibility study is to determine logistics and feasibility, as the name implies. So now that you've decided that, okay, we're going to do a non-probability sample, you now have to decide what kind will you do. And here are just some options on the screen. You've targeted sampling, convenience, quota, volunteer, snowball, and purposive. So let us go through each of them and better understand what they mean. First, our lecture today was supposed to be on quota sampling, but we need to understand the bigger framework of non-probability sampling. That's why I went through all of that route. Now, quota. Why does quota sampling belong here under non-representative? Why is it not? What about quota makes it to be non-probabilistic? Who wants to help us with that?
Judgmental.
Okay. So quota is a bit it's related to judgmental, because they are both non-probability based. But the question is like, what is it about quotas? Let's say I assign the quotas, right? I say I want to get 20%. Let's say there are schools, and I say, okay, bring 30 people from this school and 20 people from this school, right? Even if the distributions that are assigned are proportional to the sizes, because I might have schools and some schools are big, and I said, okay, since you're a big school, quota is this. What is it about quotas that lands it in this category of non-probability sampling? Okay, let me give the hint.
Because the probability of it taking is 100% from that quota, so it's no probability, because it's 100. There's no chance. There must be a representative from that quota. I think in that case, there's no probability.
Okay, but thanks very much. But you can apply that same argument to stratified sampling, where we say that once you divide into strata, you must sample from each stratum. So that means that the probability of having at least one person from that stratum is 100%. So it's a good argument, but that argument in of itself alone does not make quotas to be non-probabilistic. Do you understand my argument?
Yeah, well.
Okay. So if you are, okay, let's put it this way, right? If you're the headmaster of a school and they said, oh, we want to have a national athletic event, and you have a quota of 30 people. What kind of 30 people are you going to send from your school? Like in general,
It's those that are wrong.
Okay, so now you say, so based on your answer, right, what quota sampling is typically not what?
Not representative.
Exactly. It's in general, quotas are never selected at random. If I say I've given you a quota of 30 people to bring to this event, of course, you're not just going to go and say, oh, I'm going to throw a die and whoever I select. No, you go and look for the very best, right? Of course, by the virtue of the fact that you're going to look for the very best, that means it's no longer representative, right? There's an intention in quote. So whenever we talk about, we assign quotas, obviously it's either based on ability or it's based on first come, first serve. Now, if it's based on first come, first serve, what's the problem with that? Why do we conclude that that's sorry?
Everyone is not having equal chance.
There might be bias.
Exactly. So no matter how you implement quota, there's no way you're going to implement a quota that it ends up being random. And should you do it at random, then that means that it's no longer random sampling. That it's no longer quota, it becomes random then, right? But in quota sampling inherently always has some metric by which we are using to select people. It's never random, right? So that's why quota sampling ends up here. And so the distinction between quota, we also want to make sure that we understand the distinction between quota sampling and stratified sampling. Who cares to explain the distinction between those two for us? Because at first glance, they appear to be the same thing, right? Oh, we have a group and we're selecting from that group. So what's the difference between the quota and the stratified sampling?
Well, hello, can I respond?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, I think quota have the term quota already allocates a certain fraction to the sample, and that is purposive. But stratified is proportionate. You look at the entire population and then you possibly decide proportionately how much the sample can be derived, amount of sample that can be derived.
Okay, thank you. I'll just take 5% from your score because of the last argument you made that stratified is always proportionate. You can also have disproportionate stratified sampling, right?
Yes.
And that's also why we need weights again, because I might sample, like for example, in US surveys, for example, we always oversample Blacks and Hispanics, right? So once the word oversampling comes into the picture, that is already disproportionate sampling. And that is why we need weights to correct for that, right? So weights are needed to correct not only for non-response, but also from the decisions we made in sampling. But overall, that's a solid point. All right, so we've got quota sampling. What's the difference between... Sorry?
No, sorry.
Okay, all right, super. What's the difference between convenience sample and a volunteer sample?
So for convenient sample is depends on the researcher. The people that you can easily assess, then those are the people he's going to sample. Why volunteer sample have to do with the willingness of the audience, the recipients of the survey. So that's the difference. One has to do with the researcher, confidence of the researcher and getting those persons. Why volunteer has to do with those that are to be studied, the ability to give in their consent and want to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I administer a survey online, let's say I put a survey on LinkedIn, a link, what sampling technique would you classify that as?
Volunteer.
Okay, but is it convenience as well?
Yes, because I feel it's also convenient, but
yes,
more volunteer.
Yeah. So the point I'm trying to make is that we don't want to think of course, if we're going to describe anything, we have to put them in categories. But the point I'm trying to make is that try not to think of them as just fixed rigid categories, right? You can obviously have scenarios that could easily morph across different classifications because, well, we just have to describe things. That's why we put them in categories. Snowball sampling. Who can explain that for us? What is snowball sampling?
Hello, let me attempt actually.
Yeah. Okay, please go ahead.
Yes. Snowball is randomized really. It's kind of leaves everything to chance and decide. Oh, no, it's not randomized, it's purposive, but it leaves everything to chance to decide who fits into the entire sampling.
Okay, but your answer appears to be quite contradictory, though. You say
no, I corrected myself that it's actually purposive, but the thing there is within the purposive convenience aspect, leaves everything to chance within those that are decided to, that will be included in the sample.
Okay, thanks. Who disagrees with Isaac?
You know, you allocate.
You have two hands.
I disagree. I disagree completely.
Yeah, disagree.
Okay, let's have one person. Okay, let's just have one person respond to Isaac.
Taiwo, can you go first?
And then
I
Isaac.
agree with you. I agree.
Thank you very much.
I disagree, please.
Please, can you mute? Let's speak one at a time. I mean, you should mute.
Okay, please, can I make myself clearer, please?
Okay, yeah.
Before you disagree with Isaac.
Yeah,
all right, identified.
Can I make myself clearer?
Isaac, please go ahead, yes.
Yes, please. You see, you allocate balls and then you decide what ball is going to make the sample.
Mm-hmm.
And then it means that you roll it, and then those who pick the balls that will make the sample is what would then be called snowball sampling. So I said that within that experience, it means you've selected a certain persons, but not everyone you select is going to participate in the sampling. So that's the snowball sampling, really.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Any rebuttal?
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
I speak.
For snowball sampling, sir, this one is used in situations where it's difficult to reach the people that we want to involve in the survey. Maybe we just know about one or two of them. So we identify those ones, we recruit them, and we ask them to link us with other people in that category. So that way we continue to expand the size.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Who can tell us what is literally, what is a snowball?
Let me try.
Okay, please go ahead.
So a snowball is a ball that is formed from snow that falls down from up. So as the ball is falling down, it keeps gathering more snows around it and gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it gets to the foot of the snow mountain.
Excellent. So who can now align that illustration with what happens in the real world? We want a practical example.
Can I speak, please?
Just as the other speaker said.
We went to where he submitted it. Yes. They say he went to head of planning from there.
Sebastian, can you kindly mute yourself, please?
Okay, so as I was saying, you identify a few persons that you are sampling, then based on their professionalism, you can ask them to refer you to people of a similar nature. That way, you keep getting more respondents of, depending on the type of study you are carrying out. So just as he explained, this snowball in real life, keep gathering the number of persons that you feel are likely to give you the answer that is relevant to the study.
Okay, thank you very much. Now,
can I ask a question? Hello, Prof.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to add something on snowball sampling.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah, let's listen to Aminu Shutu first, then we'll take Isaac.
Yeah, I think I have a practical experience of snowball sampling. We are working on mastitis, which is a disease of cows. So we only know few dairy farms, and so through like the first 5 dairy farms, and then when we went there, we asked them who do you know is involved in dairy production system? And through those kind of questioning, we recruited larger number of farms. I think we have up to 25 farms in the list, and we are expanding as we go out in the field. We ask them more questions. They give us phone numbers of those individuals that are involved in farming systems. So I think that is a good example of snowball sampling. And also, it is also being employed in studies in commercial sex workers, for example. So we can ask this lady to link us with other partners that are involved in the business. Thank you.
All right, come back to you. Isaac.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes, Isaac, you had a comment to make.
Okay, yes. I was going to point out something I think that it's part of snowball that is often not mentioned. It is snowball is also applied in random sampling. And basically the element there is the spiraling effect of the ball. You know, so the first stage, when I said you decide some persons who will pick what is the ball before it starts rolling down the hill, so to say, it's what actually I think caused many persons to think that is contradictory. You see, from that point where other persons will then recommend other persons, is the spiraling effect of the ball. But within certain randomized trials, the first stages of the trial can also be selected balls that can then spiral. So if you don't do that purposively, if you do that by predetermined reasons, that is within the purposive sampling. If you do that without predetermined reasons, that is randomized sampling. So snowball can actually be applied both in randomized sampling and purposive sampling. The spiraling effect and how it began is what makes the difference.
All right. Let's unpack what you've said. Thanks very much for that. So you said the crux of your argument is that as far as we started at random, everything after that doesn't matter because it's just snowballing,
yes.
spiral.
Yes.
What is the very nature? But let's dissect that, right? What's the very nature of snowball sampling? Is friends recommending who?
Friends, right? Really?
Friends recommending friends, right?
Yeah. So groups recommending groups, really. Actually, yes.
Exactly. So once you have friends recommending friends, is that random?
No.
So it's not, and that is why snowball sampling is non-random because it's just people. Of course, you're only going to recommend people whom you know, right? And they are going to recommend the people that they know. Now you mentioned randomized trials. Just to be very clear, randomized trials are almost always volunteer samples. So randomized trials have very high internal validity, but most of them have very low external validity because they're not generalizable. And the reason why they're not generalizable is because of the fact that they are selected in a way that is, again, non-probabilistic, right? Now, from Isaac's question, however, there is one sampling type, however, that could be random or non-random, depending on how the start was selected. And it is not this screen. Which sampling is that? Who can help us out with that? So we've established that snowball sampling will always be, the non-probabilistic because it's just friends recommending friends. However, there's another sampling type that has the sole attribute of being probabilistic in some cases or non-probabilistic in other cases, depending on how the first unit was selected. What kind of sampling is that?
Thank you very much. That argument came up somewhere. I don't have an answer. I was going to put it in the form of a question, really.
Okay. All right. So who wants to help us? Who wants to bail us out with that answer?
Please, you can help us, please.
All right. The hint is it starts with the letter S. S as in Sierra.
Could that be stratified?
No, but nice attempt. Thank you.
So we say systematic sampling, sir.
Excellent. Systematic. Who wants to explain to us why systematic sampling could be random or random and non-random? Like what about it?
Yes, it's a systematic sampling.
So
okay, I get the idea. It depends on the system adduced in the process of the sampling.
Yeah, so if we selected the random start at random, if we selected the starting point at random, then systematic sampling in that context is random. If we selected it at, non-randomly, maybe you say, oh, I love the number 5. Number 5 is my favorite number. Let's start from there. Obviously, there's nothing random with how you started it, right? So think of, let's say you have houses on the street and you want to select a handful of those houses, right? You start from a random number and then you go let's say every 5th or every 6th house. The fact that the first house was selected at random makes it to be random. But if we selected it in a predetermined manner, in a manner that was non-random, then it's obviously non-random. Systematic sampling, this is a trivia question, it is unique in one other way. It is the only sampling that is affected by what? It's just a trick. Any person can help us out.
Regular intervals. Stop.
Okay. Yeah, it has to do with regular intervals. So it is the only sampling interval that is affected by sorting the data. How we sort the data will ultimately, because again, your argument is that it's a periodicity, right? The kind of variable that you're going to use will obviously affect how or who is selected, right? And so when we are sorting our data sets before we do systematic sampling, we must make sure that the variable we use to sample to sort the data must be what? Option A must be highly correlated with the outcome. Option B must be poorly correlated with the outcome. Which is correct? Highly or poorly correlated?
Highly.
Highly. Excellent.
Yes.
So if let's say we have a clinical study, we're trying to look at, prognostic factors for admission in a hospital, like what determines who lives or dies from those who are hospitalized. Well, we could sort on the length of hospitalization, how long you were hospitalized for, because obviously that's highly correlated. It would be a bad idea to sort on your shoe size, right? Because your shoe size is not very highly correlated with the outcome of interest in this case, right?
Yeah.
Now, somebody asked a question earlier. We packed that question and we said we're going to come back to it. The scenario painted was that. Sorry,
how is the systematic compared to multi-stage?
So systematic
sampling.
Systematic sampling is a single stage sampling, right? We have a whole bunch of population and we're just jumping at intervals. The systematic sampling, and can we kindly mute ourselves, please? Systematic sampling shares an attribute with simple random sampling in that both of them will yield what? Both of them must. It's not a matter of may. Must yield what? Hint. Think of the word probability.
Representative sample.
Both of them must yield sample that is representative of the population.
Okay, yes. Okay, the word I was looking for was equal probability samples. Right. So there are the sampling techniques that are guaranteed to give us an equal probability of selection, right? So when you use simple random sample, obviously you're going to get everybody has an equal probability of selection. Now, one of the greatest mistakes you're going to see in, even in some textbooks of epidemiologists, they will define random sample as a sampling technique where everybody has an equal probability of selection. What is wrong with that statement? When you define random sampling as a sampling technique where everyone has an equal probability of selection, why
the word probability, that's wrong.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks. Any other thoughts?
Please, I don't think my is an answer, but a kind of like contemplation. Can we use the word chance instead of probability?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
So why will it be wrong when a textbook of epidemiology defines random sample or sampling as sampling techniques where everyone has an equal chance of selection? Why is that fundamentally wrong?
Because
I think, go on. Sorry, go on.
Okay. Because if you pick a sample, if you pick any state or any individual, that means that individual is off from the total sample population you are going to pick next.
Okay.
So sequentially, the population continue to decrease, and that means it's not on the same probability.
Okay. There are two. What's the offensive word in that statement? Simple random sampling is sampling technique where everyone has an equal probability of selection. What is the unacceptable word in that definition?
Equal. That word equal.
Equal, right? So instead, we should remove that word and replace it with what?
Kind of reasonable chance, reasonable probability, right? Reasonable.
Fair.
Okay.
Or chance probability.
Similar. Fair
No.
chance.
No.
Significant?
No.
No.
The word begins with the word K.
Known probability.
The probability just have to be known.
I remember, yes. I remember it's known probability, yes.
The probabilities just have to be known. They don't have to be equal.
Yes,
because that we talked about disproportionate stratified sampling, where we said that we sample certain groups. Well, when we sample groups, that means that they have a higher probability of selection. That's why
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. A researcher once corrected that as well. I remember.
All right. So so those are some of the basics that we want to keep in mind. Now, let's come back to the gentleman who asked a question about he said that in his study, he wants to get a bunch of people to answer some questionnaires, and he doesn't have a sampling frame. So remember that if we want to do simple random sampling, we must have a sampling frame. If you don't have a sampling frame is simply a list of all the members of a population. No sampling frame, no simple random sampling, right? And that is why we use cluster sampling too, right? We use cluster sampling because in most large surveys we conduct, we don't have a list of all the people that live in that country, right? So for random sampling to take place, we must have a list. Ideally, a list of people, but when we don't have a list of people, we can go to the next thing we have, which is a list of places, right? Remember what we say, when the desirable is not available, the available must be desirable. So what we ideally desire is to have a list of everybody, right? A sampling frame. When we don't have that sampling frame of everybody, we'll go to the next sampling frame we have, which is a list of clusters, right? It's easy for us to say, oh, well, we have all the list of local government areas in the country, yeah? So even though we don't have a list of all the people who live in the country, we can say we have a list of all the, local government areas, all the clusters, and so we can then sample from them. And so that's the reason why we end up with cluster sampling, because we are unable to construct a list of everybody. And even if we could, we don't want to do that because that's just too much work. It's not efficient, So the gentleman's question was, we want to do sampling, and we don't have a list. And so we want to just use our judgment and say, you seem like an expert, and you seem like an expert, right? That was and sorry if I have misrepresented your question. If you're here, you want to reframe the question, please feel free to do so. I can't remember who it was that asked the question. Let me see if I can find him. Yes, Aliyu, that was your question. So please, what is the question in that whole scenario? I can't seem to understand what the question.
Yes, sir. It's a research which is being conducted based on the list, beneficiaries of farmers. So these farmers are beneficiaries of a program, which is an anchor borrowers program. So we want to conduct a research on them to see what have they benefited from them. So we now went to the ministry. They says they didn't have the list of these farmers. So later on, but we have the local governments under which we have 4 zones under this local the state, which they benefited from this program. So now the target population here the respondent we want to reach. How are we going to reach this respondent? Since we do not have their list that we are going to meet them, each one of them, and administer this questionnaire to them. This is my question, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
So I believe we fundamentally answered the principle of your question. Based on what we've discussed, what do you think?
This one is judgmental.
Sir, based on what you said, since we didn't have the list of the beneficiaries, then we have the list of local government which have been benefited from this program. So we can go to this local government, then we can at least find 1 or 2 people that benefited from this program, since we have a local government which have benefited from the program.
Okay. So what we want to understand is that sampling is a science and an art. There's no right or wrong way of sampling, right? You just sample based on the context and based on the resources you have. In your case, it seems let's say you need 100 people, right? If you only have 1 person to start with, you need 100 people, or you think you might need maybe a couple of dozens, but you only have 1 person to start with. Based on the circumstances you have on ground, what sampling technique lends itself to you in that context?
That should be a snowball, sir.
Excellent. You see, you start with this one guy and okay,
snowball.
Exactly. So half bread is better than okay, my good friend, I have you here. Here is the topic, and thank you so much for participating in the survey. Now, can you please refer me to other people? You see, so the context, the circumstances will tell you what is on. So there's no universal guide that says you must do this, right? You just have to use discernment and apply based on the context you find yourself. All right. So before we leave, we also have to emphasize the concept of open and closed surveys. One of the most common mistakes people make in research is they may have the intention to conduct a probability survey, but then the reality of it is that it ends up being non-probabilistic. Now, here's a quiz question for you. Can a survey be both probabilistic and non-probabilistic simultaneously? What do you think?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Can I explain my answer?
Who is speaking?
Yes.
Okay, we just need 1 person to if you want to defend that answer, you can just raise up your hand and let's assign you the floor. Okay, no hands. All right. The question was, can a survey be both probabilistic and non-probabilistic at the same time, simultaneously? Chinedu.
Chinedu, your hand is up. Okay, Isaac, you can go on.
Okay. Probably, because it can start by being non-persuasive, and then within the sample, it can become within the sample become non-persuasive, randomized. Effectively select.
Okay.
So once you have the selection, then within the selection you can then.
Okay. All right, thanks for that perspective. I'm sure your hand is up.
Yeah, I think he has more or less spoken to what I. So it can be in different stages. If it's a multi-layer, at each layer you can choose to, you can now combine or do a probability or non-probability depending on the stage. If you have a representative sample within, then you can now still do a convenience or sampling to further narrow down.
Okay, so the answer is false. You cannot have a study that is both probabilistic and non-probabilistic simultaneously. All right, you have the one drop rule. Once you have a one drop of non-probability, the study becomes what?
Oh, okay.
So a single drop of non-probability sampling renders the whole study what?
Non-probability sampling.
Exactly. So you can't say, yeah. So you can have, because even remember when we do even multi-stage studies, we still have to account for probabilities at every single stage. Once we cannot calculate the probability at a given stage, right, it means that we cannot, and when we say non-probabilistic, right, why do we call it that way mathematically? Why is it called non-probabilistic? I'm talking about the math now.
It's non-probabilistic because the chances of selecting a particular person is not known.
And why is it not known?
Because it's less than one. Because it's less than one.
It's one.
That's for non-probabilistic.
All right, let's break it down. A probability is made up of two numbers. A number at the top, which we call the what?
One.
The numerator, divided by the number at the bottom, which we call the what?
Zero.
No, not
Denominator.
zero. Denominator. All right, so we have a numerator over denominator. Now, in a probability sampling, we know the number at the top. We always know the number at the top. Of course, if you sample people here, if you have 5 people, of course, you have 5 people. The problem is that it's always with the denominator, right? If you have 5 over, if you say you have 5 people, I say, okay, 5 people all over what? I say, I don't know. 5 divided by I don't know is what?
0.
No, it's not 0. It's undefined. You cannot calculate the probability. That's why we call it non-probability, because you have a number that you have a numerator, but you don't have a denominator. It is mathematically impossible for us to calculate probabilities, and that's why we say it's
not.
There's no probability here, right? So that's the problem. So want to remember that you have a one drop rule. One drop of non-probability sampling renders the whole study non-probability based, even if you had all the previous rounds were probability based. So that's very important because you want to be mindful of how you conduct your surveys and how whether you treat your surveys as open or closed. So let's look at a quick example before we close for the day. Let's say that. So let's go. Let me log into the Chisquares platform and let's look at some practical examples. Oops. Ilya, can you confirm you can see my screen? It seems to be paused, no?
No, sir. It's still the previous one.
Oh, really? Okay, let's see. How about now?
I don't know if it's my internet, but it's still the previous one.
All right, let me stop sharing and just sharing. Start all over, sharing all over again. What about now?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, great. So I'm just going to take just a close survey, just a random close survey. And one look at some considerations that we want to keep in mind when we design studies or want to collect data, right? That could easily render our studies probabilistic or non-probabilistic, maybe unknowns to us. When you want to share your survey here, and you copy a link. So here, so you have the different ways of sharing your survey, right? And in the settings here of the survey, let's go to the settings first of all. All right, so here you have a setting here, email distribution control. Yes, to keep. Noel, can you mute yourself, please? I think there's some background static coming from your end. Thank you. So the setting here is email distribution control. Select yes to keep forwarded survey links active, or no to deactivate upon sharing. So you can say, oh yes, I want people to forward surveys, or I want such that when the surveys are forwarded, they become deactivated. Now, there's the second consideration here is that when you're sharing a survey, you have the opportunity to allow link forwarding to generate. Let's enable this. Let me share the survey. So you have the option to upload emails, right? So of course this is because the settings they have disabled the link forwarding. So if link forwarding is disabled, so let's think about the implications of this. You allow participants to forward responses they received. Like so, if I got an email, I can forward it. What kind of sampling is that? Has that become immediately? I shared my service with you. Maybe you have you have your emails. You then forward it to other people. They forward it. What kind of sampling technique is that?
Volunteer sampling.
Okay. Volunteer. Snowballing. Right. So imagine, right, my intention originally was to have a my original intention was to have a probability-based sampling, but the settings I have allowed individuals to keep forwarding the survey, right? Or when you choose to have a survey where you just have, let's say I have this survey and I want to share the survey again, like I said earlier, and the links, right? I choose to copy a link and go and paste it on LinkedIn or Facebook, right? What kind of sampling does that become? Just by this act of exactly, it's volunteer or convenience, right? It's no longer probabilistic. So there's no. Yes, go ahead, Hafsat.
Bro, it's convenient.
Yes, convenience. That's correct, right? So we have to worry about whether our surveys are open or closed surveys. So that's the term we have to be familiar with, right? Open surveys, closed surveys. What are open surveys from what we've discussed? Who can now nicely summarize what open surveys are versus what closed surveys are?
Closed surveys mean you can't refer them to others outside a closed, unidentified circle of respondents.
If I wanted to exercise a closed survey on this modal, on this screen, what will I have to do?
You will disable if you want to a closed survey, that link forwarding enabled will be disabled.
Okay. All right, I disable it, right? And then what else do I have to do?
You have to limit it to one respondent.
So I will have to, it's close to who? It's close to individuals that are invited directly, right? So that means that I would have to upload emails to invite participants.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or I download the questionnaires and I assign to individuals specifically. So those are the ways. So it's not just about the design, right? You have to worry also about the distribution of your survey. How are you distributing the survey? And what kind of biases could creep in there? Now, sometimes we also want to have surveys where we introduce quotas. And especially when you're doing commercial research, most companies will tell you, oh, we want to have X number of people. I mean, most of the surveys are not generally designed to be representative, but you also need to be able to know how to implement quotas, right? And because most surveys we do, you might have incentives, right? You might say, okay, we're going to give $30 to each participant. And it's very important that you cap the number of participants as at the budget allowed for that group. Because if you only have, let's say, X amount of money, well, you want to make sure that that subgroup, is capped, not that people just come, and then there's that you run out of money for the other subgroup. So it's very important to know how to assign quotas, So I'll quickly show you a demo of how to do that. Let's give a quick, someone give us a random survey. Someone share a title of a survey for us to use for this quick exercise. So we want to see how you can assign quotas.
Determining the level of hunger in Nigeria.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. So assessments. Levels of hunger. All right, so that's our survey. The location is Nigeria. The aims, generate the aims quickly with AI. All right, so to examine the impact of food security, relationship between perceived levels of hunger, I'm just selecting some random elements there. I'll clear the remaining ones away. Keywords, let's just call it hunger. And let's just create new project here. So I'm going to skip this for now. We don't want collaborators. So the goal is just to show you quickly how you can set up quotas, right? And again, that's extremely important, especially if you're doing commercial research, because most companies you're doing work for would want very specific number. We want, 200 adults who are aged, who are older women, with this condition, and we want this number, You obviously don't want to be checking this thing manually. Here's the way to do it. The wrong way to do it is that you would just start collecting data, and you have to start inspecting the data and start counting one by one. Oh, do I have 200 people? And then I'm not sure how you're going to stop it. I've had cases where people would actually manually delete records, because they say, oops, we've exceeded the quota that was set. Obviously, these are all wrong ways to do it, right? And you should be able to use automation for those kind of things. So let's just create a few questions and show how we can use quota sampling. And let's proceed with that. So let me just create 2 questions. So let's say we are doing a survey and we need, let's say, let me use country just for the sake of simplicity.
Use of electronic resources in Nigeria.
All right, thank you for your thoughts. Which country are you living in? So this is country. And so let's just explore here. Countries of the world. Right, so we have country. So for the sake of our quick demo, we just have a survey here, and we want to implement quotas so that we have, let's say 50. Let's ask add one last question on, let's say, country or gender.
Gender.
Which gender or which of the following groups do you identify with? And so let's call this gender. So we have male, we have female, and maybe we just have maybe transgender, and maybe other, right? And so push questionnaire, and then right, that's enough. Let's just show how we can set up quota. So imagine that you're interested in making sure that male, men who are Nigerian men, you have 50 Nigerian men, you have 50 Nigerian women, you have 50 Ghanaian men, or whatever number you want. That's the idea behind the quota. And you want to make sure that once those groups are reached, that the survey discontinues. So what we'll do is come to logic. These are the different logics you have on the platform. You come to quotas. And the instruction, you are given instruction here that establish quotas to limit the maximum number of participants per group. Subsequent eligible participants will be thanked but not allowed to participate. So you set up the quota by selecting the variables of interest. Well, hopefully your survey questionnaire has more than just 2 questions. And done selecting. So in this case, if country is exactly equal to Nigeria and gender is exactly equal to male, then enter the maximum number of responses for this group. So let's say we want 50 individuals for that group, for Nigerian men, right? So once we've added a group, we're going to be shown this message. This is what will be displayed to the participants. So here it says, unfortunately, we have met the assigned quota. You can change this to whatever you want. It doesn't have to be, you can type anything you want there. And this is the body of the message, and you can save and include in the survey. And that's how you add a quota. So you can add, there's no limit to number of quotas to have. So you can have as many quotas as you want. So the idea is that once this number is reached, the individuals no longer participate, will no longer be allowed to participate. So that's how you add quotas on the platform. Now, for the other sampling types we discussed, which were, I will just quickly run through how you can, we have an entire module that is dedicated to sampling. And so if you want to do, if you have a sampling frame and you want to sample from that, you'd come to the sampling and you select perform probability sampling on a sampling frame. Sampling frame is a spreadsheet, like we mentioned earlier. You can choose the spreadsheet or the sampling frame you have and select the kind of sampling you want to do, whether it's simple random, whether it's systematic or PPS. And it should be implemented. I don't have a spreadsheet to show you. I wasn't planning on going down this tangent, but since we discussed it earlier, I just thought I would show you how you can practice. The best way to learn is just practice. So go after the class and find the sampling frame and just practice and see how, observe the probabilities of selection, right? How, simple random sampling, how it generates, equal probabilities as the same as systematic sampling. That's the best way to really practice these things. And I think that is that for the coverage. I believe we've covered everything I was supposed to cover today, which was primarily quota sampling within the context of non-probability sampling. All right, any questions? That's the end of my story.
Thank you very much, Prof.
You're welcome. All right, so this is our last class for the year. It was very nice having the interactive sessions with all of you for the past several months, and we look forward to engaging next year when we resume.
Okay, Sean.
Thank you so much, sir. We've really enjoyed this session. It's a rare opportunity to have this privilege, to have learned so much, and for your guidance and patience. Thank you so much. So, but my question is, what's the difference between targeted and purposive sampling?
So most of these terms, like I said, it's, sometimes potato, right? Targeted, purposive, it's purposive in, and then let's throw in that an additional word there, which is judgmental, right? They're all more or less like, similes of each other. Judgmental, obviously, it's purposive. It has a purpose, right? The reason why let's say I'm trying to sample, headmasters, right? I'm trying to look at tobacco use behaviors among youth on school campuses. I feel that the headmasters are the best key informats that I could access for that study. Why? Because they are serving a very specific purpose, right? Why? Because I have judged them to be the best, So in general, we don't want to worry too much about nomenclature, in general, right? As far as we identify what we're trying to do and we can measure things with, with accuracy, the rest is really just potato.
Thank you, sir.
You're
Francis.
Thank you, Prof, for the insightful presentation. Prof, I want to find out whether multi-stage is really a type of sampling technique.
Yeah, multi-stage sampling. So multi-stage, so yes and no. Multi-stage is not a you can't say, oh, we did multi-stage sampling. That doesn't tell us anything. It just tells us that your sampling was in multiple stages. Now the question is, what did you do at the different stages, right? That is the interesting part that you have, you've left out from the description. So a more appropriate description would say we did a multi-stage, stratified cluster sampling. We did a multi-stage, stratified simple random sampling. So the bottom line of what I'm trying to say is that don't just say multi-stage and leave it blank. You have to tell us what happened subsequently, because multi-stage simply tells us that it was multiple stages. And in general, in fact, for precision of language, we want to even avoid using that word multi-stage, right? When you say multi-stage, it begs the question of what? This is not a trick question. When you say multi-stage, it begs the question of what?
Means probably your sampling was done in different stages.
Yeah, but when you say multi, what's a reasonable question for me to ask? Or what's the question for any reasonable person to ask you?
Multi-stage what?
Yeah, but focus on the word multi now.
How many?
Very good. How many? So you say multi-stage, and I'm like, okay, how many? Are we talking about 2 stages, 3 stages, 4 stages? It's one of those things that sound technical and fancy, but really like a word salad, right? So we want to aim for clarity of communication, right? Clarity of communication should be our priority. So instead of just saying multi-stage sampling, it's a much more useful way to say we did a 2-stage, stratified cluster sampling. Now, I'm not left there wondering, this multi-stage, like how many? I wonder how many stages they did. The question is already answered by your very explicit communication. So that is a long answer to a short question that simply asks, is multi-stage sampling a probabilistic, sampling technique? So the answer is, the no part was just to say that, well, just saying multi-stage is not very helpful. But when you now couple that and provide us more, the devil is always in the details, right? Give us more nuance, and then we can decide whether it's probability based or not. All right, any other question?
Oh, just a question of what you just said. 2-stage stratified simple random. What's the need for that? Just doing 1 stage, you should be able to get your sample.
So remember we said that sampling is a science and an art. There's no wrong way of, if you bring in 10 survey statisticians and ask them to do a sampling, you're going to get 100 different answers, and each of those 100 will be the same, will be correct, right? And very different, obviously, from each other. So we don't want to think of, and this is one of the things I always emphasize, let us not think of things as right, like things in sampling as right or wrong. Let us think of them like, oh, is this practical or not practical in this context? So not like saying, oh, this is wrong. That is not a very it's not a very helpful way of thinking. So I want to think more of, okay, in this current context that I have, what makes the most sense? What is practical? What is efficient? And also, you have to remember that it's about costs. Let's talk about these scientific issues and precision and validity, but we don't talk enough about cost. Money makes the world go round. You need money to design studies, right? So the most important question in study design actually is like, what's the budget? Like, how much money are we dealing with here, right? Because that drives a lot of the decision making. So yes, you can have a 1-stage, 1-stage cluster sample where we just select clusters and just take everybody in each cluster. or you can have two-stage clusters where we take clusters and then we have another unit selected within those clusters, like schools, and then within those schools, we sample everybody. Or we can have three-stage, where we, for example, select clusters, we select schools in the second stage, we select classes in those schools in the third stage, and then everybody in those classes is sampled. Or we can have a four-stage sampling. We select clusters, we select schools, we select classes, and then, select some individuals within. There's no right or wrong answer. That's the point I'm trying to make. It's all a question of what is the context and what are we trying to achieve.
Thank you, Prof. I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry, Elizabeth, your hand is up.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth.
So I just wanted to, thank you so much, sir, for the insightful lecture. Really, it was something that you actually made so much part, and I'm so thankful for the lecture. So I actually asked the question, but I wasn't sure. I mean, in the chat box, it was answered because my network was fluctuating. So the question is based on when you said something about not having a non-probability sampling technique and then having a probability sampling in the same study. Once you have one non-probability, it actually makes it all non-probability. So I was asking, for example, in a way, trying to avoid having both sampling methods in a study, and then you have a large area that you want to cover, and then out of that, maybe that study area, you take maybe 2 local government areas just to, it's purposely, in a sense, you are purposely selecting the 2 local governments to sample, and then, but you don't start your sampling technique from there. And then when you now want to sample, you begin maybe with a simple random in order to, I was just trying to, just because you're trying to save cost, number one, and you want to be able to get, want to avoid having non-probability sampling and probability sampling in the same study sample. So is that a very good way, just selecting the LGAs and then now starting your main sampling procedure with probability sampling technique? I don't know if that question is clear.
That's very clear. Thank you. So how did you select those 2 local government areas?
So I was actually telling someone about it. I based it on the fact that the population size in that area was more, and then what we're looking for, our desired population was in those 2 local governments, and we were more in those 2 local governments than the other local government areas.
So the things you wanted to choose were already in your mind.
Yes.
So
we already have one.
So what do you think? What are your thoughts? So do you think that is probability or non-probability?
I know that that's non-probability. So I was trying to avoid, because she already started sampling work by saying, okay, she's doing a study. Instead of saying she's doing a study this area, for example, Lagos State, instead of saying generally, she already said she's doing in Lagos State. So I said, why not let us do it? We are doing in these 2 local governments. Then you start your sampling from the local government so that you can be able to do a probability sampling starting from the local government instead.
So in that case, right, what you want to do is that you're going to define your study population as those 2 local government areas.
Yes. Okay.
So it's not about, obviously our study populations are defined subjectively. And there's no requirement, of course, there's no research that is driven objectively. Every research question is driven by our subjective biases. There's a reason why we choose this population and not that population, right? Nobody says that you must. So the population, when we talk about PICO framework, right? The P in PICO is always determined subjectively. So if I want to do a study in Nigeria, if I say my population is Nigeria, of course, no sane person will come and ask me, oh, why did you choose Nigeria? I'm like, well, that's my research interest, right? So that first decision of population, the target population, is not required to be objective. Of course, it must be subjective. So in this case, you can, and that's one of the ways we can, in this case, you just want to focus on those 2. So it's not an issue of selecting those 2 at random per se, but It's an issue of defining your population, those two, and then you can sample within those probabilistically. In that case, your study will be but please come with yourselves. But the inferences from the study, there's a lot of background noise. The inferences from your study will only be restricted to those populations, those two local government areas. You're not going to be saying, oh, I want to make generalizations to the whole state, which appeared to be what your original intent was. By restricting population to those two, well, that's a population. Isaac, I think there's a lot of background noise from your end. Thanks. So your inferences will be restricted to those two. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Isaac, your hand is up, but then there's so much noise from your end. I don't know if that was unintentional. Isaac, you want to speak?
Yes, I just unmuted myself. Actually, that is not from my end. I've been muted. I muted myself all along. I'm surprised I had that mute. I just unmuted once you said it's my time to speak. That may be technical. I don't know. Sorry if it's coming from my end. I don't know. It's inevitable. No technical. Otherwise, I'm muted. I just unmuted. All right. So can I go on, please?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So, I have a question that as a follow-up to your response to the last question. I think if I read the mind of the question properly, it's like the researcher is trying to, at the end of the day, use two local governments to generalize. So, you mentioned one factor that should be considered by researchers is often overlooked, which is cost. And the researcher feels that, okay, the cost of crop I can stand for all of them. And I'm going to randomly choose any two local government. So I think the question, I think, reaching the mind of the question, I think the precedent arises as to if you randomly select two local governments and within the two, you positively sample without give thought to a combination of random and sample and positive at the same time in any way?
So I mean, I had a lot of difficulty trying to hear you. There was a lot of static, but in general, we prioritize two things in research. We prioritize obviously the validity, but also issues of precision, right? Those two, and again, we don't want to say one thing is more important than the other. So in terms of validity, can you randomly select two clusters from a bunch of clusters and generate valid results? Well, yes, technically, because it's randomly selected and all of that. So that answers the issue of validity. But again, remember we said we have to worry about all of these things. We have to worry about validity, we also have to worry about precision, right? Now, what about from the perspective of precision? Is the results from two clusters, able to generate results that are precise? Well, now that is where we now have a whole branch of frameworks which we call precision, suppression rules, right? Suppression rules are rules that have been created to make sure that the estimates we generate are reliable, right? The idea is that we don't want you coming and giving us estimates that are not reliable, and then you tell us, well, here are big disclaimers. Go forward with these disclaimers and be at peace. No. If the results are not precise, don't even display them, right? One of those precision rules involve sample sizes. So first of all, you look, is the number of individuals less than 30? If it's less than 30, please, we don't want to look at those results. Just throw them away, right? And this is talking about this large complex surveys now. And then number two, we look at the relative standard errors. Relative standard errors, are they more than 30%, right? So in other words, the relative standard error is simply the standard error divided by the proportion times 100. If it's more than 30%, well, that means the estimates are not reliable. Now, in this context, the most important suppression rule now is the degrees of freedom. The degrees of freedom is generally calculated as the number of clusters minus the number of strata, right? So in this case, you have two. So in general, we want our degrees of freedom to have to be at least 8 or more for complex surveys that involve clustering. Now, this is where we have a big problem with hard design. Hard design has two clusters, two clusters from how many? It obviously does not meet the number of degrees of freedom we would want for precise estimates. So most journals will say, no, we will not publish that because there is not enough precision. You cannot select. Imagine you have 700 and something local governments in Nigeria, and you say, oh, I'm just going to select 2. Well, it's not going to fly because it does not meet suppression rules, right? So especially the rule that has to do with the number of degrees of freedom, right? In this case, if you had two clusters, let's say you didn't have any strata, 2 clusters, that means you only have 2 degrees of freedom. The minimum you want to have is about 8, right? So based on that, sure, you've met the issues of validity because everything was done probabilistically. But like I said earlier, we worry about not just issues of validity. You have to worry about all of these things together. Validity is not about saying which is more important. They're all important. Want to optimize both of them. So in high use case, a better decision will be to say, we will just define our study population not as a bigger entity, but as these 2 small clusters, right? These 2 regions. And I think we also, we sometimes worry too much about generalizability. It's almost as if results must be generalizable before they constitute good science. We can have solid science that is not representative, right? We talk about clinical trials. Clinical trials are not generally representative, but they are the gold standard of evidence. Why? Because they have internal validity. So so we want to first of all acknowledge, take a step back and acknowledge that it is not everything that must be generalizable, and that's fine. It's fine for results not to be generalizable. Remember that what matters whether our studies are probabilistic is our intent. Is there an intention? Sahid, can you Sahid Salawu, can you mute yourself, please?
Sorry, I'm sorry, sir.
No worries. Yeah. So the first and cardinal question we want to ask ourselves is there an intent to create generalizable knowledge? If there's no intent, well, we can still collect data from those 2 local governments and still make meaningful contributions to science, meaningful contributions to policy. So yes, so I would say that sometimes we worry too much about generalizability, right? So results, sure, it's nice to have them to be generalizable, but we also have to know that that's why we have another whole new term called transportable. Transportability of estimates means that we acknowledge that these results may not be generalizable to this other context, but they might be transportable, meaning that there are some similarities that we can take the lessons from these results to apply there. So it's not all about generalizability. That's the bottom line of what I'm trying to say. All right, any other questions?
Thank you. Yes, bro. Yeah.
Please,
Hello,
Sahid, please put up your hand. Some people are here waiting already. Aminushit, you can go ahead.
Please. Yes, Prof.
Hold on.
Aminushit,
okay.
Go ahead.
Hold on.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Agaku, for your untiring efforts in educating us on so many aspects of epidemiology and data handling statistics. There is a question that I have regarding sample size calculation. I think one of the advantage of doing sample size calculation is for the economic reason. And for example, if the formula tells us the minimum, and that is the number that is required, can we go ahead and sample more instead of just restricting ourselves to, say, 350, for example? After the sample size calculation, can we sample more, since the larger the sample size, the greater the power statistically? And then will it make sense if I wish I can sample all the lactating cows in Sokoto State, but will it make any sense if we sample the entire population? Because the idea behind sampling is to draw a subset, to draw a sample within a subset of the population, and then we do whatever we want, and then we make inference to the larger population after the study. And so does it make sense to sample an entire population?
And
I think, yeah.
Okay, good questions. So when we take sample sizes, we don't want to only worry about science, right? Like the issues of precision. We also have to worry about ethics. And one of the things that an ethical, like any good ethical review committee would ask would be, why would you, because every study involves risks to the participants, involves burden. When you when you take more than the needed sample size, you are just putting more people at risk. Again, we agree that every study has some risk. You are transferring risk to more people than is absolutely needed for you to answer the question. The sample size tells us that this is the number of people that you need to answer this question. So either side of that divide gives ethical questions. For example, if we need, let's go with the number you said. We need 350. I think that's the number number you threw around.
Yeah.
If you need 350 people to answer this question and your study comes and you only have 100, it's very clear that you cannot answer this research question because you are underpowered. So the question is, the ethical issue here is that why did you expose these 100 people to risks when you knew you could not answer this question with that number, right? The converse also applies. If you have 350 people that are needed, and you're like, well, just because I can, I'm going to recruit 150 people extra to give me 500 people. So the ethical question here is why? If 350 people is the people we need, then why would we need to to expose this 150 extra people? So the crux of the question essentially lies down to understand the difference between the nominal sample size and the effective sample size, right? And I think that's what you're trying to drive at. The nominal sample size essentially is just the sample size we get from if we take the formula and just punch in the numbers, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we get. So sometimes we get a lot of people come to our seminars and like, oh, well, I took the formula and I applied it and I didn't get the number that was on the Chisquares platform. Like, well, what you just calculated is the nominal sample size. What is displayed on the platform is the effective sample size, which accounts for a whole lot of other things. For example, it accounts for, if you are doing a multi-arm study, it accounts for multiple comparisons. It accounts for low response rates. It accounts for, a whole bunch of other things, right? So that when we account for all of these things, it now gives us the effective sample size. But if you have the effective sample size, you should go forward with that and not necessarily add a whole lot of other people because, you might just have questions from ethics, In fact, most ethical boards will ask you at the end of the day, because when you open an IRB, you have to close the ethics application too. And one of the things we look for is, what was the sample size that you said at the beginning? And what was the sample size that you actually recruited? And why did you go overboard? You have to answer that question. So knowing that you have to answer that to the IRB alone should give you pause. And then your second question was essentially, why can't we just take a census? Why take a sample?
Yeah.
Well, it boils down to issues of economics. If you have all the money in the world, well, the census is great. But censuses are also wasteful because mathematically, we know that if we took a small subset of this big population and we selected these people at random, it gives us it's as good as taking the whole population. Mathematically, we know that, right? So the question is like, why would we want to waste so much time? And, so it's again, I think the answer might be more of, the answer is more philosophical, I guess. And of course, practical based on your resources. But if you have exercised great care in selecting your sample to make sure it's at random, there's no mathematical basis for trying to get the fuller sample in the census. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Prof. We still have one more hand. Isaac.
Yes, thank you, Prof. I had a second question there. Your comment on the fact that surveys don't necessarily need to be generalizable as studied. I was trying to figure out if differential surveys can sometimes settle the question of sample size and all of that.
Sorry, Isaac, hold on a minute. Most Bahu, Ibrahim, can you kindly mute yourself, please? Thank you. Sorry, Isaac, please continue.
Yes, I'm going to appreciate the later part of the response to the question I asked as the sequel to the first question on local government and sampling. Actually, you hinted something. You said surveys or sampling research generally must not be generalizable to the value. And I think it answered the question I had in mind about what differential surveys necessarily make the sample how high accuracy. So I appreciate that first of all. The question I have now is on sampling formula. Here, very malfunction, very funny idea. The sampling formula is too old. Yeah, right. Example, and I ask myself, then mathematical formula that is usually mathematically relevant. You consider old, Thank you.
Isaac, I am really struggling to hear you, to listen to you, but I'm really struggling, and maybe it's just my ears. Maybe you could type your question in the chat. I just for the life of me can't hear what you're saying. There's a lot of static in the background.
Yes, it's true. It's true. None of us were not hearing Isaac.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now better?
Yes,
it's better now.
Okay. I think my earpiece would have been responsible. I'm asking basically that should a sampling formula such as Tara Yemeni be considered invalid simply because it's too old? Because I hear very funny arguments, in my opinion, funny anyway, that a sampling formula is too old, and even if it's mathematically useful, because it's so old, should not be applied in research.
Okay, we generally want to avoid focusing too much on rules and worry about the principles of research, right? The beautiful thing about principles is that principles are eternal. So a principle that held true 1 million years ago will still hold true 1 billion years ago. So that is of less concern. So essentially, what we should worry about is, one, do we have a well-defined population and a clearly defined research question? Two, have we ensured that our studies, we have to the extent possible reduced threats to validity, right? And you can never have all of this in one go. You can never have a study where you perfectly eliminated all threats to validity. There's always some, especially with observational studies, obviously, but there will always be some level of, residual confounding or, unmeasured confounding. So it's less about, rules or, because those are subject to interpretation. What we really want to worry about is principles and making sure that we consider those fundamentals in our study designs. Okay, another question?
One more time. Ugochukwu, probably will be the last.
Hello, sir. Prof.
Yes.
My question it has to do with the issue of sampling in a study that has to do with probably in a geopolitical zone where we have a 6 states, let's say about 7 states, and the researcher decided to pick about 4 states instead of picking all the 6 states. Would that selected 4 states, will it be enough to generalize that probably that you are representing the geopolitical zone and the researcher decided to pick about 4 states from that start? And from the respondent from all the 4 states, you're now generalizing that, okay, these respondent or probably this population, they are valid for the study. I just want to confirm. Instead of you probably picking all the 7 states, you decided now to picking about 4 states, right? As in your population from the 4 states, instead of 7 states. The selected 4 states, are they enough for that geopolitical zone? Or that is it a must that we have to pick all the respondents from all the 7 states?
I think we've answered that question quite often in this session, repeatedly. The idea is that we want to just select a sample. We don't want to get worried too much about fixed numbers, right? And that's why we have frameworks to assess precision, or so yes, your answer in a nutshell is that yes, you can select 4 out of 7. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, ultimately is guided by what's the research question, what resources do you have, and a whole lot of that. So that's more important things than just some arbitrary numbers that could change from one context to the other. Again, so that's why we have to really understand the base of what we're researching, and because that's what ultimately drives a whole lot of decisions. I hope that is clear. So some questions that I asked, we can't rush to give yes or no answers, or because it's just contextual, and it's that's why we just encourage more on let's just focus on the principles and really understand what we're trying to achieve. Once we understand that, everything is all set.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Hello, Prof. Hello, Prof. Let me add something.
My hand is up. Can I go ahead with my question?
Before you ask question, please, let me say something about the 6 geopolitical zones. You are carrying out a research that involves like 6 geopolitical zones. For example, in Nigeria, we have Southeast, we have South-South. Now you were able to select only 4 states, and you didn't select the remaining 2 states. Remember that there are cultural differences in the 2 that you've not selected, and that automatically means you are generalizing your result based on that 4 states, which may not be correct, because the other 2 states, which may have different cultural settings and which may answer your questionnaire in a different way, are completely neglected. So that's my addition there. It's better that.
Sir, I just want to probably, you are doing.
It's better that you take some stated. That's exactly what you stated. Ethical consideration will require that what you stated about your research, either 7 or 6 states you are carrying out your research, will all be touched for that research to be valid. Thank you.
Okay, let me answer the question. So when you are using the choice of clusters matter. So I think this is the last question we're going to answer. So you have 7 states, right? There is such a thing as clusters that are too big, right? So there are 2 hypothetical scenarios here to present. One, you are trying to do a study of 7 states. You choose to have the 7 states as clusters. That's option number 1. You have 7 states as clusters. Option number 2 is that you have, let's assume that each state has, 10, for ease of mathematics, 10 local government areas. So you have 10 times 7, which is 70 clusters. Which one does it make sense for you to use as clusters? 7 states, 70 clusters. Why? Any thoughts?
Well, I prefer 7 states, 7 clusters. To have a good representation.
So the question is simple. Go with 7 states as clusters, or should go with 70 local government areas as clusters?
So I think you can go with 7 states. I think it depends on whether the clusters are, how congruent those clusters are. So if there are similar dynamics in each of them, you can just, as a matter of fact, you can select a few states out of them.
Okay. So that would be incorrect. Can we meet ourselves? And everybody just kindly meet themselves, please. So the reason why it would not be helpful to select. I'm wondering where that echo is coming from.
Isaac, please mute. It's from your end.
Okay. So the reason why so in general, in principle, you want to have clusters that are, okay, thanks. You want to have clusters that are, okay, let's go at this illustration, right? In presidential elections, why do you imagine that the presidential nominees go to grassroots organizations and have some coffee in the, why do you think they do that? Because that will give us insight into why we choose clusters the way we do. Yes, Gochuku.
Actually, my hands were up to ask a question, but incidentally, if I may just make a comment with respect to your question. I think, besides what you have said earlier, pragmatism is a key guide in sampling. However, for generalization, generalizability of a study, there should be equal opportunity. As much as possible, representative of the population that we want to study should be taken into consideration for generalizability. Remember, the key constraint may be pragmatism in terms of resources and others.
Okay, thank you. All right, who wants to answer my question? Why do presidential aspirants go to grassroots organizations, like small coffee shops? Like, why?
Well, it's to get an opinion of every
context.
Is to get, because of, just like the person that asked the question asked, there are variations in opinion, perceptions, culture at various clusters. So to have a feel of how each cluster perceives them, they need to interface with them and so on. That's actually maybe acceptability.
Exactly. So you want to get as close to the ground as possible, right? Imagine you went to a restaurant and you said, can I have the menu? And they gave you two big items on the menu. You only have food and drink. Those were the exact words that were written on that menu. You're like, can we have a little more detail? Like, what kind of food? Like, can we have a more detailed menu, right? When you have a sampling at the level of states, using states as clusters is like having that menu item with just food and drink as big items, right? There's, the state is just too large for you to get a lot of, remember that whenever we use clusters, right? The big problem with cluster sampling is that people in a cluster are very related to each other. And the bigger that cluster is, the more problematic that issue is for us. So we want to reduce the cluster to as small as we can. So the smaller the clusters, the better. So that's why, in the US, for example, we use counties. In general, the standard practice is we use second administrative units as clusters as a standard worldwide. So in the US, for example, we have state first administrative units, counties, second administrative units. Like in Nigeria, you have states and local government areas as second administrative units. So no, you should not use states as clusters, right? You can use local government areas as clusters, because remember, the whole point of cluster sampling is that you want to get to as close to the ground as possible. So please do not try to have menu items that are just food and drink. That is exactly what you're doing when you use large units like states as clusters. It doesn't give you that wide degree of variability in responses as you want, because there's just so much clustering that is occurring within the level of a state. And also remember that we talked about you have to worry about validity and precision, right? When you select just 4, that goes back to the same problem that the individual who selected 2 clusters had. You don't have sufficient degrees of freedom. So remember that we said that we want to have at least how many degrees of freedom? Who remembers?
8.
8. And how do we calculate degrees of freedom again?
N-1.
Where n is what? No, not n minus. Oh yeah, that is valid in that context, but not in this one. That will be valid in any other
minus factor.
Strata.
Exactly. Number of clusters minus number of strata, right? So in this case, you're already starting with how many clusters? When you use states, in this case, you said you have 7 states, you're selecting 4 as clusters. How many, what's the degrees of freedom?
Three.
Well, let's say just
four.
everything's one strata, right? So that would be like, at 4 at most, right? So no, you cannot even report the results from that study because they're not precise enough. So again, remember, you don't have to, it's not only about validity we have to worry about. We also have to worry about precision, right? So that is why you want to, and again, using clusters, using like local government areas allows you to touch across all states. If there are 70 local government areas and you said, okay, I'm going to select, 20 of those at random, it's very likely that you're going to touch every state. So it allows you to get that kind of flavor across the whole population that you are interested. And if you only have resources for 3 states, maybe what you should do then is to define your population as those 3 states, right? Okay. Again, you don't have to results don't have to be generalizable to the whole world. You can just make your study generalizable to that small population and stick with it. All right. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. All right. Thanks, everyone. Looking forward to seeing you next year with continuation of our classes. All right.
So,
cheers.
someone is asking that you review chapter contribution.
Okay, we'll do that.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining. Don't forget to fill
Thanks,
that.
everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Paul.